You already, oh, is that the signal? Hey, everybody, I'm your host, Felipe, and you're listening to the Total Basis podcast. I am joined, as always, by Sean Flannery, but before I get to him, I like to bring in a special guest. He's been with us before, and I'm glad to have him. He's a Yankee fan, but most importantly, he's one of the smartest people I know in terms of fantasy sports. He does fantasy football. He does fantasy pro pick'em. Against the spread, I think, right, Mario? Is that what you do? You do against the spread. Yep. And just straight up. And also, most importantly, does fantasy baseball. Please welcome, as always, Mario Margola. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. It is a tradition now at this point.
Yes.
Like fantasy baseball draft season that you message me and say, hey, you want to come on? And I mean it when I say I'm always super excited. So thank you. It's my pleasure.
You're right. It's March, and my little sensor is on my mind, going like, "Oh, it's time to bring in Mario because we need to talk to him about fantasy baseball." And today's topic will be: what did we learn about what did we learn from the 2020 fantasy baseball season, and how do we use that for the upcoming season? And before we get started, Sean, how you doing this morning?
I am awesome. I'm super excited to have Mario back on the show. He's really like the OG guest. I mean, dating back to 2 years ago before he even did the whole reboot as the Total Basis podcast, like he was the guy we brought on a couple of times, and it's always fun when he joins us.
Yeah, now we're doing it under special circumstances because we usually do it after we do our drafts. It's because he's in our league. He's in the Baseball Life Fantrax League. So we usually bring him in. So I might have to call you from the bullpen and bring you in one more time to break down the drafts. But for now, I thought, it's been a while. Let's talk about, last season and what we got to do to get ready for the 2021 season. And let's get started with the first thing that I have here on my little Word document is nothing mattered last year. It was all a dream. Players had COVID, slumps were more apparent, hot streaks seemed more hotter. There was no chance in hell for regression to rear its ugly head. I mean, there was a couple of times, we saw a few players.
Fernando Tatis, Luis Robert.
Luis Robert, Kyle Lewis, but for the most part, it seemed like the good times kept on rolling. I mean, and let's face it, all the stats were fake. It's faker than wrestling, So that's what we learned. We'll start with Mario since he's our guest. What did you learn from the 2020 baseball season?
So I swear to the people listening that we did not prep this part ahead of time, but I actually wrote to myself that there wasn't enough time for regression to hit too many different spots. So pretty amazing that you brought that up, because I like to look at for teams, which teams were quote unquote unlucky and lucky. And those numbers can stretch like over 162 games. You could win 8 games based on what math will define as luck. And there's not a team that I think five wins was the luckiest last year. So, extrapolate that out over the course of the season. And it was Miami, which speaks very well to the fact that Miami made it to the playoffs in a 60-game season. But yeah, everything else, it's funny you said that. I'm looking at other than Miami and Tampa Bay, every single team was within 3 games in either direction of their luck factor. So that's the first takeaway, is there was very little time for regression. I'm shocked that you brought that up as the first point, because I had it on my screen as a talking point. The other thing that is going to be a struggle for me, I love to be super aggressive with everybody, but I really like young pitchers who you can say threw 60 innings in one season, and now you can look at them at 120 to 140, or a guy who threw 100 innings last season, maybe getting to 180, and there's such a good projectability there. You have an entire league that was capped at 60 games last year. And I don't know how you're going to take a starting pitcher and trust that their arm isn't going to fall off, or that the team isn't going to be scared their arm's going to fall off. So my number one takeaway, besides the regression, is I don't know how to handle starting pitchers that I would like to project forward.
Oh, it is so funny you mentioned that, because right now at the moment I am going through the process of trying to rank all 239 starting pitchers I have on my spreadsheet, and it's not fun. Usually there is some fun involved, because there's some upside that you have to account for, and then you look at the projected numbers and you got to figure out which ones are falsities and which ones are somewhat true. And this year it's up in the air. I can't make anything off of it. So that's one of the things I was going to mention in my for my preparations for 2021 is really be disciplined about the starting pitching. But I wanted to ask you a question, Mario. Is you talked about luck. I mean, is there a way that you gauge luck? Is there like some sort of statistic that you use? Do you go on like Baseball Reference and utilize something like base runs or Pythagorean theorem? How do you quantify luck? I guess this is the question here.
So yes, Pythagorean win-loss record is the easiest way, and it like oversimplifies it to the fact that you can literally sort by luck on Baseball Reference. So yeah, I use Baseball Reference. They have a detailed standing section that has Pythagorean record, which is based on based on runs allowed and runs scored, and it calculates how many wins they should have had, and then gives the record that would have been versus the record they actually have. So I don't have anything fancy there. It literally is luck as listed in Baseball Reference. But I will say, over the course of a season, it's not impossible to track luck by eye, the same way that you would track, any factor that is going to regress over 162 games. Like if Mike Trout is scorching the ball, but he is 0 for 12, he's hitting the ball well. That is an air quotes unlucky outcome. Yeah. So in a real season, I should say real, because I will not throw away the season the way that you so meanly did just now. But in a season that is long, you can see luck happening. But yeah, if you look back over like in the standings, it's right there. You can see a team, I mean, Miami had a negative run differential.
Yeah.
And they were 31-29. Like that's really hard to do. So just based on any metric, like you don't allow more runs than you score, but win more games than you lose. It's very hard to do that.
Well, I mean, Miami had the advantage because they gave everybody COVID.
They had a little built-in vacation for their season.
Yeah,
they came back and just won 15 in a row. I'm like, all right, now we're good.
Them and the Cardinals. Sean, same question to you. What did you learn about the 2020 season?
Well, I'm going to actually segue away from like the actual baseball here. But, this time last year was when we really started getting into this podcasting, and really I started digging into fantasy baseball more than I've ever done in my whole life. And I just realized how awesome the fantasy baseball community is, both on Facebook, on Twitter, and like all the people and friends that I've met along the way. Like tomorrow I'm going to be on a radio or on podcast with at MLB Moving Averages, Tony Tambo from Open Bar Fantasy Dudes. And this time last year, I would have never expected to be doing stuff like this. And now I'm in drafts with a fantasy sports writer Hall of Famer. And it's like all of this just seems unreal to me. But if we're going to actually make it about baseball, in the 60 games, which guys that you look at were on quote unquote lucky? There were a lot of high BABIP guys last year. There were, I think, something like 15 with BABIPs over 360. Which one of those guys actually can maintain it? There was only one person with a BABIP over 400, and this one hurts my heart because I actually do buy the breakout. But it was Michael Conforto, and he had a 412 BABIP. What are we supposed to do with that? He batted 322, which was a career high, but like how there's going to be some regression there, but how much? Sorry.
Is that an actual question to us, or are you?
Yeah. Like, what do you guys like? Are we buying Conforto's breakout 2.0? Like, all right, how much of it are we throwing away? How much of it are we keeping? Which I find myself asking a lot of players this year. The ones that did well, we say, okay, how much of this are we buying? And the guys that did terrible, we're like, also, how much of this are we buying? I mean,
let me ask you a more macro question.
Yeah.
Do you think more people in the fantasy baseball drafting community, forget experts, writers, everything, the actual people who are drafting, who you're going to compete against, do you think more people are selling last year and discounting it entirely, or factoring it the same? Meaning there's no in between. You're either taking those numbers as gospel, 160 games you're just pretending are 162, or you're pretending there was zero. What do you think from either the drafts you've done or the people you've talked to? Like, what do you think is the scenario in everyone's mind, the bulk of people?
It is so funny you asked that, because maybe about 2 weeks ago, one of the fantasy people I follow on Twitter, he posted a poll that was, okay, what are we doing here? Like, and one of the options was, how much are you taking 2020 into account? And it was like 10 to 30%, 30 to 50, 50 to 70, or like 80 to 90, or 80 to 100. And I wanted to say, and it kind of fell into that 30% realm, which sounds about right. But at the same point, when I factor that in, I look at guys like, Pete Alonso, who was great in 2019, and he did okay. I mean, he obviously wasn't as 2019. The batting average was lower. The home runs, he was still on pace for over 40. But I know he's not the only one, in that you look at their numbers and they never got hot. They slumped.
They didn't have a chance.
They slumped, and then they kind of came back. They had some positive regression. They came back to the mean, but they never got hot. And I think there's the players that we've seen be very good before 2019, 2018, but they never got hot in 2020. I feel like those players are the ones that are going to be really good fantasy draft values. And it's all about identifying those guys.
Right. So I asked this question because I since you mentioned it now, I do think I saw that same poll. I think probably through you on Twitter, actually. And it, just think about the math of it. 30% sounds about like the scale of last season to every other season in history. But there's what I think everyone's doing, including myself. If you can take the 60 games of last year and add it to the 162 from the year before, you're getting a 200 and whatever, 222 game sample size, and basically pretending that you have one gigantically long season as opposed to a real length season and a third of it. And that's one way to approach it. Is, again, it's technically 30% because that's about what the ratio is, but you're scaling it. You're distributing it over the whole 200 and something games. That's one way. But I asked the question because in a redraft league, and I haven't done this yet, and I haven't written this yet, so this might be a new shift of my thinking. I have a feeling more people are discounting last season than counting it as gospel. And I wonder if the edge wouldn't be to just go all in and say 2020 was the most real season you've ever had. And everyone who crushed it in 2020, you target, because those people are going to be discounted. Like anybody, like Conforto had a ridiculous BABIP. So people are going to look at that, and they're going to look at the 60-game season and say, okay, what would he have done over 162? Well, I don't know, but I know what he did over 60, and maybe he's going to go a round or two later because people are going to want to sell last year. And if they're selling it, maybe I want to be buying it. Maybe that's like I didn't think about that until, we went down this rabbit hole, but like if people are going to completely discard the season, maybe I'm going to overvalue it and actually get cheaper people who are doing well. Maybe they're really good. We don't know. Maybe it was a legit breakout.
Mario finding the market inefficiency in fantasy baseball already. Like, this is ridiculous. I
don't know if I'm going to act on it because this is going to mean I can't draft people I really want, but I think it's a way to handle it.
I do have written on my notes something, because my notes are scattered all over the place, is that, and this is something we talked about. I remember Henry brought up that question to us, Sean, about, well, what about ERA? How do you gauge ERA from last year? And I know, and then I remember that a lot of people like to use the previous year's stats to help them make their rankings for the upcoming season. And I strongly advise against that. And even suggested what you suggested, Mario, is just combine 2020 with 2019. Or if you really want to get a bigger picture, combine it with 2018 as well and get a really large sample size, because it is pretty murky to just go solely on 2020 numbers.
If you're gonna mathify it, if you're gonna put it into math, I think the only answer is to combine seasons. If you're gonna actually take an average, instead of a 30 game start sample size and then last year's 10 or 12, you're going to say this guy started 42 games over the last 2 years. In those 42 games, this was his ERA. Like, I think that's the right math approach. But people don't get that set up and then know that people aren't going to draft on that. They're going to draft on weighing the first 162 games more.
Well,
that's where you might get the edge.
That's why I brought up the notion, like, hey, I know like a lot of people are not very high on projections, right? Projections are just fake numbers, they're pretend numbers. But I think this is the season where you really have to hunker down and just suck it up and use projections because they're going to be your best friend. I firmly believe that, whether you're using the zips, the steamer projections, the ATC, whatever the case would be, the bat, I think projections are going to be a better help this year than just solely depending on previous year stats. As I don't know, I feel like when you're using projections, you are able to dig into that. You're in that world, right? You're in that, let's say, steamer. You're in that steamer world, and there's nobody that's an outlier. Everybody's kind of crunched in together in a vacuum, and that's the season that ultimately comes out for the projections that they use. And I think that, and of course, it's based on a 162 game season, so there's no hot streaks involved here after a 60 game season, or massive slumps. Regression in this steamer world has already been rear its ugly head, or in some cases rear its positive head, and out come the numbers for the 2021 season, and there you go. You have something to work with. You have something a little bit more trustworthy. I don't know, Sean, I mentioned that before. How likely are you to utilize projections when you're making your ranking lists?
I mean, I definitely look at some. Steamer and zips always, you look at them, and to me they always feel like so what's the opposite of aggressive here?
Conservative.
Yeah, conservative.
There you go. They're always like super low
averages, right?
Yeah, it's like you look at a player. I'm gonna just keep my little Mets train of players in my head going. Jeff McNeil's batted like anywhere from 310 to 320 in 3 consecutive years, and they're like, we're projecting him for a 278 batting average. It's like, I get it. It's very hard to project somebody for 50 home runs or a 330 batting average. It's near impossible. But the one that I've really started finding myself leaning towards, and I like the first iteration of it a lot, and I like his new one even better, but Derek Carty's the bat and the Bat X. The Bat X, the way it incorporates a lot of the StatCast data into it, I'm finding myself really using the Bat X a whole lot.
Yeah, the Bat X is... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I would think anything StatCast driven is going to be, kind of tying back into where we started this conversation, is going to have a lot of fixing for luck setups, meaning like, StatCast cares about how hard the ball is hit, and it doesn't care that it was an out or a home run or anything. It cares that it was hit hard, which to me, I also care about. So I assume any system that's going to accurately use StatCast data is probably ahead of the game, because it's going to fix that problem where, somebody's BABIP might be low, but they're actually crushing the ball. And I don't care what the BABIP is if I'm not taking last year's numbers. Like, I'm not drafting them for 2020. I'm drafting for 2021. I want a guy who's mashing the baseball. So I would think that if you're saying the StatCast is incorporated, I see why you're drifting in that direction. I like it. That's good.
Yeah, that's actually a good. I mean, that's been like every podcast I listen to, they always cite the Bat X projections. So maybe I missed the boat by not using them this year, but I used StatCast more than ever in preparation for my 2020 draft, and it does give you a nice picture of things to come. But it also I think the one danger I would warn people about is that it does kind of give you this false sense of security by utilizing them exclusively, and it creates it's almost too theoretical when it comes to certain players and certain pitchers. So and then of course the other thing I don't like about going with the just the StatCast numbers, and this is from my personal experience, and it has nothing to do with the Bat X projections, but just using StatCast numbers alone. It's hard to gauge stolen bases, and let me tell you, totally. You could definitely do it because of sprint speed and all that. But just because someone's fast doesn't mean that their stolen bases are going to go up, or their what do you call it? Their opportunities for stolen bases is going to go up. Yeah. So it really depends on opportunities and situations, which is something that that StatCast, when you just solely go off StatCast numbers, which is like, again, sprint speed, and there's another one that they use. I forgot, Sean, maybe and you could just blurt it out.
I do know that
bolts. They use bolts as well.
Yeah, there was bolts, and then I know I was listening to an episode of Rates and Barrels the other day. I've been trying to catch up with them.
Good luck.
And they were talking about how the instead of using average sprint speed, using the how they have it on StatCast divvied up into the after 40 feet, after 45 feet, after 50 feet. And that if you look at the first like 60 feet, their sprint speed in that 0 to 60 feet, that's actually more determinant of stolen bases than average sprint speed on the whole. But even then, that's not taking into consideration, is this a team who's going to give their player the green light? Were they just running in this set situation? Stolen bases, I find myself like just running crazy, literally trying to figure it out. Like it's insane.
It is the hardest. It honestly, I'm sure there are people out there smarter than I am that have figured out some math behind it. It always comes down to, do I want to put a roster spot dedicated to a guy who I think is fast enough that he's going to try to steal this many bases or not? That's it. I'm either basically punting stolen bases out of necessity because I'm not going to, as aggressive as I am, I'm not going to roll the dice on people who are maybes in that area. I'm either going to dedicate a spot and say, this guy's got to get me stolen bases or I lose, or I move on. Like it is such a function of the landscape of the league, of the team that they're on, of every single situation and opportunity. I mean, what if, not that this can actually happen, but what if every time this player's on, there's a runner in front of him? Desire doesn't matter at that point. There's not an opportunity. So it is probably the most volatile, like, back end math. I'm sure the actual front end of what you see is fine, because you do see that some guys, they do run. But to get to that point, it's almost where, like, when Trevor Story started stealing bases, that was just an awesome bonus. That was not I think this guy, who's generally known to be a high batting average, high power output type of player at shortstop, I think he's going to start running. Like, there might have been something there, but I didn't see it. And then when he did that, you're now left with, do I want to take Trevor Story earlier because I think that's going to continue? Or am I going to avoid him because I don't want to overpay for steals? Or am I going to hope I get Trevor Story for his power, and if he gives me stolen bases, great. So stolen base projections, Felipe, you are right that is the one area where you have to be. I would be the most conservative in the world on stolen base, where anything I get above the baseline they're showing me is an awesome bonus. I would never aim to say, 25 stolen bases is what they're saying. Yeah, I'm going to get that. I would say that's like 12 if I'm lucky. It happens.
Adalberto Mondesi, according to ATC statistics, is supposed to steal over 50 bases this year.
I like Ariel's projections too. I do like Ariel's projections at ATC.
Hold on, that's Ariel Cohen. You can see his projections at Fangraphs. Go ahead, Sean.
But no, talking about Adalberto Mondesi and stolen bases, I feel like I just kind of want to mention this. But in the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, we're just into round 18 now, and was it Nick Mariano, I believe who it is. He had the 15-1 turn at the very end, and he went with the craziest thing I think I've ever seen in a draft. He picked Adalberto Mondesi at 115 and Trevor Bauer at 2-1. And it was just like mind-blowing. And he was so coy and funny about it after the fact. But then I started realizing, like, damn, he just, got the best steals off the board. I was like, it really made me think about how am I going to attack steals? And all of my hitter picks, basically my first 6 or 7 hitter picks, all of them I anticipated some form of stolen bases from, at least 5, I think. Trevor Story was 1, and then I had Harper at 2. Those 2 guys right there, I'm hoping for at least a combined 30. That's being conservative. Trent Grisham was one of my next ones. He could be like 20 by himself. And since we're not masochist and this isn't a net stolen base, change net stolen bases, Felipe.
Never.
And then, I added like Nick Madrigal, who we really don't know how much he's going to be allowed to run. I would hope that Tony La Russa goes full boomer and is just like, yeah, everybody's going to run. And if he bats 320 and has a 350 on base, he's going to get like 150 attempts to run. So Tommy Edman was another guy. And so I'm just trying to build it brick by brick, but there's definitely ways to go about it. You can either get Adalberto Mondesi and just win by default stolen bases. You can try and build piece by piece and have no clue where you're going to end up, or you can just straight punt it. But then if you play in a league that has overalls, out of multiple leagues, it's kind of hard to win any sort of overall if you punt any category. So you kind of put yourself in a bind there. But it's so interesting. I hate chasing it, but I hate just punting it too.
That's why I say, though, you have to basically decide, am I going to dedicate a roster spot to this person? Because as much as I am aggressive with getting my guys, how I always phrase it, like Adalberto Mondesi was one of my guys last year, and actually felt like he disappointed me because of how I expected him to win me stolen bases alone and also provide a batting average and, be everything that I needed. Right. So that's the problem is at one point, and again, this is hypocritical for me to say because I am a psychopath when it comes to drafting, but you are sacrificing something to get that guy.
Thank you.
Like you are giving, Adalberto Mondesi, yes, you're going to win stolen bases. And honestly, it's really not a bad play. It's never a bad play. But there are some potential downfalls. I used to draft Billy Hamilton every single year with the expectation I would stolen bases, and he didn't win me stolen bases. And now I had a roster spot that was killing me on 5 categories. And I was willing to trade 4 categories for a legit win, but I didn't get it. So that's one thing is what if it doesn't happen? And the second thing is each time you're taking those guys, and I'm not saying that they weren't the best available, but the Trevor Story example to me is the best case scenario, meaning you're not drafting him for speed. You said brick by brick, and that's the right way to do it. But you're doing the actual bulk of that brick is everything else Trevor Story gives you, where the stolen bases are an amazing bonus. Like Trent Grisham, I love, but if he doesn't run and doesn't hold all of his numbers, which ended up being very good, like you could have missed someone else for that. And again, I'm saying this as a complete hypocrite. I'm viewing it from the opposite side because I'd make this mistake with how aggressive I draft. At least we should at least present that, like, when you're making that move to slowly piece together stolen bases, you are almost definitely sacrificing someone else you could have been drafting that could give you something more stable. So if your decision is always, let me hope I get stolen bases, but I'm drafting this guy for someone else, to me, that's the best way to not, if you don't get Mondesi or a Mondesi-like, then to me, it's always, I'll take the stolen bases that come with this guy. But I could be wrong. You might, listen, if you end up beating that guy in stolen bases, you are so far ahead of the game because you have, if Grisham's giving you stolen bases, he's probably not sinking you anywhere at that point. And you probably win, honestly. So to me, it's that debate. It's, do I dedicate a guy like Mondesi, a roster spot to a guy, or do I want to build it where it's the bonus to me? Mm-hmm. That's
the said guy who had Mondesi, he also went and just said the FU to everybody in terms of stolen bases, and he picked up Whit Merrifield as well. So
I don't hate that at all. I actually think that's kind of the way you're going to do it, right? Like,
just when in doubt, just pick a Royals player.
Yeah, Nicky Lopez season. Let's go.
But no, it's something I've been preaching for ever since. This is like before Sean and I would just be me and Mario talking on the podcast way back, like talking maybe 2016, 2017. And that was always my gripe. Like, why would I want to draft Billy Hamilton? And then years later, why would I want to draft Bradley Zimmer when that's all they're going to do is steal bases? And if they don't steal bases, I'm screwed. I'm out 4 categories and I don't want to deal with that. And the argument was, well, stolen bases are such a commodity, a high commodity, that you kind of have to take that risk. And I've done that before. I've drafted Billy Hamilton and Malik Smith and Bradley Zimmer, I think almost at the same time, same team. And that was brutal. I hated that team and I never went.
Right.
So no, never again. Like if I'm going to get somebody with stolen bases, I'm going to go after a Trevor Story, because even if he steals like 5 stolen bases, at least he's not hurting me elsewhere. Like with the crazy leagues that I play in, where I have to account for all the other categories as well, at least he's not hurting me. So I'm looking for that. I'm always looking for that power speed combination, even though that's not probably a good way of winning fantasy with punting stolen bases in that manner. But I can't do it. I'm not going to chase Miles Straw because he can get me 25 stolen bases.
You know why you're going to chase Miles Straw? No. You know why?
Why?
Because he has a career 390 on base percentage in the minors, and he's fast as hell, and he has great defense. There's nobody that's going to fight him for the center field job in Houston. I am all over Miles Straw. I am all over Miles Straw.
No, screw that. I could have sworn that Billy Hamilton also had a high on base percentage when he was in fantasy, or when he was in the minor leagues as well. So no, I'm not doing this. Go ahead, Mario.
Both of you are right. That's that's why this becomes such a difficult thing. You have so many paths to doing the right thing, but I mean, honestly, I was the one who was drafting Billy Hamilton foolishly, and I still to this day, I really can't decide if I made a mistake or not, because in the moment, it was Miles Straw. Like, he's going to. Maybe he won't win it alone because someone else will have Mondesi, but like, he's going to keep me afloat in a category that is so difficult to fill. It's hard to say that's not the right decision, but when you do it and he doesn't give you the one thing he needs, it is a crippling blow to your team. It's such a high risk, high reward move that I'm not going to say I won't do it because that's not in my strategy. My strategy is to be crazy, but I have to admit, to anyone, there are many ways to failing and only one way to succeeding. The only way to succeed is if that guy gives you the stolen bases you need. Otherwise, you're burning something. So it's a delicate, tightrope to walk.
That's a very good point. And the last thing I wanted to, so we can transition to the 2021 stuff. First and foremost, the DH was awesome in the National League. It just solved so many problems. Sean being a Mets fan and I kind of being a quasi Mets fan over here. When in doubt, just pick a Mets player off waivers because everybody's playing now. The Cubs could have used this a few years back, but they also took advantage of it by suddenly getting Ian Happ to have more regular playing time and finding out, hey, he's finally living up to some of that first round potential that the Cubs were hoping for, that they were getting when they drafted him a while back ago. So I hope they bring it back after this year. I know there's that's being used as a bargaining chip for the collective bargaining agreement that's gonna cease to exist soon. But if they can just bring that to the National League, that would be great. All problems will be solved. More hitters on the player pool to tick. So I was really happy with that. So crossing my fingers that they bring it back sometime soon. And lastly, the last thing I learned about 2020, once and for all, man, pitching sucks. There's no better way to put it. It just sucks. It really sucks. It's the suckiest suck that ever sucked. But no, it's like outside of the elite pitchers, the Jacob deGroms, the Garrett Coles, the Shane Biebers, the Trevor Bauers, all those guys, anything after that, you might as well just interchange them and just pick at random as to who you want to be anchoring your starting rotation, because they're all going to be, it's so volatile. Last year's top 10 looks different than this year's top 10. And then even before then, the top 12 look a lot different than the years prior top 12. It's no stability outside of the top 2 or 3. And the same thing with relief pitchers. Relief pitchers is even worse because all the closers you thought were closers are no longer closing. And I
mean, Roberto Ozuna literally went from a top 5 closer pick to not having a team.
Right.
And he's still not on the team. And he's assumedly perfectly healthy. I mean, there was the rumor that they wanted him to have Tommy John and he didn't want to have Tommy John. So that was the reason they didn't re-sign him back. Yeah. But it's all these, how many relievers last year did we see that jumped up from A-ball? I mean, that had never played above high A or even double A or triple A. And then they came up and they did somewhat well. And who's to say that if they do lock down some sort of late inning role that's, consistent, and somebody's like, ooh, I'm going to pick them for my saves hold league because he's getting a lot of holds, or he got a lot of holds last year. And then the league just catches up to him because they're some 20 random year old reliever who hasn't pitched above double A, and then they start getting shelled. It's such a weird, the relief pitching landscape is very weird just because of that influx of young players that we had last year.
And I do have a whole topic of discussion for relief pitchers only. So let's save that for the 2021 stuff. Okay. Mario, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say that the only other comment is that it's also because teams are placing such a higher importance on more innings from your relievers, where your starter isn't going 7-8 innings. He's going 5. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden you have not only, like Sean was saying, guys who have never pitched at a high level, but they're being asked to pitch the 6th and 7th innings of a 1-run game so that you can get to your guy that you have in the 8th inning and 9th inning. It is the relief pitcher. I don't even know how to describe it. Just the world of relief pitching right now is so wild, because if you get a good one on a real baseball team, forget fantasy, you are so inclined to say, this is my 6th inning person, my 7th inning person. You know, you're so
high
inclined.
leverage.
Yeah, because that's how these teams are planning to win games. They don't know if their pitcher is going to go into the 7th inning. So if I can get a 20-year-old who's going to give me the 6th inning every time, then that's my 6th inning guy until he's not.
Yeah.
And then we take the next one. It's a really wild shift of mentality, you know?
Yeah.
But God, I jumped in. I know you want to go relief pitching later.
Yeah. That's fine. It's fine. It's a good segue. It's a good sneak peek. But I just wanted to bring up something. Billy Hamilton. I'm just seeing what he, and I lost the page. But anyway,
he had a career 350 on base in the minors. I looked it up. Straw, that's like a 40-point difference. Come on now. Well, granted, Straw didn't run as much in the minors as.
No, I literally just.
But Billy Hamilton was like the stolen base guy. He was. It almost felt like he would never get caught.
No, here I wanted to individually call it out, like per season. 2010 rookie league, 383. 2011 he dipped to 340, but he's still over 100 stolen bases, so it kind of balanced out.
100 bases in a season.
He stole 155 in 132 games in 2012. That's
wild. Amazing.
High A,
amazing.
High A 413, high A 413, double A 406, triple A. Well, I mean, he went dropped to 308, but by then the Reds were ready to just bring him up already. But I mean, they all look nice when they're in the minor leagues. I'm just saying. Okay, so let's 2021 manifesto. What are we going to? How are we planning for the season moving forward? And I guess my thing would be everything starts fresh in 2021. It's something that we alluded to earlier in the podcast. But I mean, last year, like I said, just a dream, a nightmare for some. Let's start fresh for this 2021 season, and it feels like almost like and Sean, let's start with you. It feels like a restart of sorts. Is that the way you see it, or do you see a little bit different than I do here?
A restart in like what context? Like, are you saying everybody's just starting over, or
kind of like compare, like relatively speaking to like the 2020 season? I feel like 2021 is like this fresh outlook. I mean, think about where we were last year. We were getting ready to draft these players, and then all of a sudden there's the virus that's coming, and now we don't know if there's going to be a season, and then the season starts in July, and chaos ensues. Now there's a designator here in the National League. Now there's added playoff teams to deal with, and we don't know how people are going to react to COVID. Players are going on COVID protocol like nothing, like they're going on the IL. Teams are getting in trouble with COVID. It seems like it was just a bad dream. And then, of course, you have the results of the players playing, which is what we talked about. Some players took advantage of the short season. Other players struggle with the short season. It's I don't know. I just feel like this year's a fresh outlook for a lot of players.
Finally. I think now, after you rambled for a little bit and bought me some time, I do think that in 2020, especially once they finally decided, hey, this is going to be a season that's going to be really weird, really different. I think some teams saw a 60-game schedule, teams like the Marlins, and said, hey, maybe we can win. And there were teams like Arizona. Arizona kind of did the same thing, where they were kind of in it until the very end, and then they realized, hey, we're not winning this. Screw it. And but I think a lot of teams that wouldn't normally try to win did try to win. And I think that is often good for fantasy. You see teams that really try and, scrap I'm not saying that players go out there and try and lose on purpose. I don't think that's the case at all. But there is an obvious situation sometimes where you see teams not try to win. They don't put their players in the best position to win. That didn't happen as much as I thought last year. But now going into 2021, those teams like the Marlins, the Royals, granted the Royals, who I think could be 2021's Miami Marlins, in which they kind of sneak in, not into the playoffs perhaps, but into the picture. I think more teams are not going to try to win in 2021, which it isn't like a bold prediction or anything, but there's so many teams out there that it's so blatantly obvious they're not trying to win. And when a team's blatantly not trying to win, Their star player probably doesn't care as much. They're less likely to have one dude who gets all the saves, unless you're like Shane Green on those really crappy Tigers teams 5 years ago. So it's bad for baseball as a whole, but it's also bad for fantasy. So it's tough.
Mario, what about you? Go ahead, Mario.
I actually want to jump in on that because, Sean, I think you 100% nailed it with the comment of some teams looked at the season and said, hey, we can do this. I think that is between the short season and the expanded playoffs, you had two avenues for a team like the Marlins who nobody, and I still would say, even if you gave me, 100 more games, nobody would expect them to make the playoffs. Even with last year's starting point, if you said, okay, we're starting at 31-29 and playing the rest of the year and keeping the amount of teams, we still don't think you make the playoffs. So you had two ways, though. You had a short season and an expanded playoffs. So you had teams aim for something they never aimed for before, which is very cool to see as a baseball fan. But where I really thought would go wrong is that you had teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Rays who are going to throw their gloves out there and make the playoffs. I mean, there was almost no physical way that the Dodgers and Yankees could have missed the playoffs when you're letting in half the league and you're playing 60 games. It's almost impossible. So I thought you'd see I don't know if I'd call it a regression, but let's call it a more level average of wins across the board, because your bad teams are playing better and your good teams are not trying as hard. That actually didn't happen. Now the Yankees almost missed the playoffs. If you go back and look at the end run of September, they needed some wins. But like Tampa Bay won 40 games. The Dodgers won 43 games. They were 43-17. So as much as I expected like a more level playing field, just because good teams would not, like the Dodgers didn't need 43 wins to get in, but they were just so much better than everyone that it didn't matter.
Right.
So the starting point of what you said, completely agree that it was good for baseball and it was an interesting twist to see bad teams trying. What I am curious about is how hard will that fall be now for Miami? I thought Toronto would have been a playoff team last year, 60 games or 162 games. They had all the right makings of a team ready to pop, but they just did it, right? Like they did make the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to now like follow that up with okay, we're going to do this and then do it again for 3 more months. I am more curious about all those fringe teams that did make their push. Will they drift back towards it's not in my best interest to, rush a guy up for service time issues? I don't know. I think we might get more 2019 approach, like much more hardcore, with the exception of if the league says we're going to expand the playoffs again. If they keep the same, normal playoff format and 162 games, I think those teams that wanted to compete are going to take that same step backwards and say, no. Look at, if you're in the NOS right now and we're telling you that only 2 teams are getting in at most from your division, how can you compete if you're not the Dodgers or Padres?
Rockies are going to be like, I'm out of here. Bye, guys.
I mean, the Rockies were, and I just saw it before, they were 26-34, which last year wasn't really that close, but also wasn't that far. You take that 26-34 through 60 games, and the Dodgers are 13 or 14 games ahead of you, and the Padres are 11 games ahead of you. How do you finish that season? How do you continue to compete throughout? It seems like we're going to get a stronger reaction. I guess it's a regression, but it's more of like a stronger reaction back to the original plan. Miami, like you said, saw that moment and seized it, but they're not going to have that moment this year. So how are they going to handle it? And when they fall behind 4 other real teams in the NL East, that to me is what I'm most curious about, is will they just go back to winning 60 games and losing 100, or will they hang around? Because that would be immensely impressive this year if a team can hang around that doesn't belong.
Just wanted to read some of the comments here before we move on. Jet, who is in our baseball, the Fantrax League we were alluding to, the baseball
champion.
life. No, runner-up.
Oh, runner-up.
Yeah.
My
Aaron.
My bad.
our tri-commissioner won the league again last year. So I decree that all asses will be kicked. My team will reign supreme, he says. Okay. Sure. Yeah, he'll be having like 10 Milwaukee Brewers and then wonder why his team sucks. Okay.
Hey,
Joe.
We all laughed at his team in the draft last year,
Yeah,
and look where he ended up. I mean, we gave him a lot of hell, and he ended up in second place. So
yeah, we talked about it. We talked a lot about it.
Brandon Woodruff. Like, he was the one that going into last year, Brandon Woodruff was kind of like a novel act. We weren't really sure like what to expect from him.
Hold on, brother. I was all in on Brandon Woodruff.
Okay, but were you in on him like where he was in on him? And then
where he wasn't? No.
Yeah, I think he got him like in the 4th or 5th round, and we're all looking at each other like, what the hell's going on here?
Joe, who's chiming in, no one knows how to project starting pitching this year. It's going to be a lot of fun playing the FAB game, which what does that stand for, FAB?
Free agent. It's how much you spend like on waivers or whatever. It's an auction waiver essentially.
All right. Henry's chiming in. How much is Sean going to eat when Glaber has a breakout season? And we already see that Sean has been eating this whole time.
I had to get my breakfast in, finally got delivered.
Well, here's my breakfast right here. I haven't even opened the packaging of it yet. So let's move on. The other thing I wanted to point out is the return of the catcher. Last year, Sean and I had this big time argument. I think Mario was a witness to it all, maybe or maybe not. But last year, I saw the catching landscape, and I thought to myself, wow, it's really thin here. You need to, I think this year I'm going to need to chase after a top 5 catcher. And the guy I was targeting was Salvador Perez because he was catcher number 4 or 5.
Yeah, and the guy who hadn't played in a full season because he missed all 2019, which was kind of crazy to think. But
yeah, well, that's how thin catcher was last year in 2020, and it's a tale of two teams for me. I only have 2 teams, but they're both keeper leagues. In the one league, in the Fantrax league, the Baseball Life league, I drafted Salvador Perez. In my points league, I did not draft Salvador Perez, and I went with someone else. I can't remember that name. Long story short, Salvador Perez ended up outplaying all those guys that I ended up with in the other league. Whoever I drafted got dropped in my points league right away. I went with Austin Nola before I settled with Travis d'Arnaud, so I got lucky that I found a good replacement. Meanwhile, in the Baseball Life Fantrax league, it's all kosher. I mean, Salvador Perez is producing, he's hitting for average and getting on base. He got hurt, comes back, and it's like he didn't miss any time. But everything about Salvador Perez came to fruition in 2020. 2021, however, is a little different for me. I see more catchers, a surplus of catchers now, for like better than last year. Now, this is all relative. I mean, catcher still sucks, but I mean, for God's sake, Gary Sanchez is catcher number 12. I'm looking, Mario, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at Gary Sanchez number 12. I'm like, hey, good looking. How you doing?
The ugly chick at the bar, the chick that bats 200 at the bar.
Hey, man, there's inner beauty in all of us, all right? But no, seriously, catcher number 12, you're telling me Gary Sanchez, or even like I told Sean, you're telling me James McCann could be had at catcher number 13? I think I might wait a little while. I might wait a little longer on catcher and not go aggressively after the JT Realmutos, the Will Smiths. Like Sean goes after Will Smith a lot. Sorry,
I do want to say this. In the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational Draft, I did have a moment where I reached for Will Smith because I wasn't sure he was going to make it around to me 20-something picks later. And when 20-something picks did come back around, I almost did something unheard of and went double catcher with back-to-back picks inside the top 10. I almost picked Will Smith, and then I was going to pick Salvador Perez, and I was so close to just being like, screw you, league. You guys get stuck with the crappy catchers. I'm getting the good ones. And I was going to send – I had a plan. I was going to send it to Felipe and everything. And then finally, the rational part of my brain said, no, you idiot. Don't draft 2 catchers with your first 10 picks. And I can't remember who ended up picking, but I picked somebody else instead. I think it was Dinelson Lamet or something like that.
It's probably for the best, to be honest. It's coming from me.
After redoing my rankings, so this whole weekend, I actually do have Gary Sanchez at number 7. But still, I mean, he was like top 3 last year. Now he's number 7.
Right.
But I feel like there's more depth. I mean, guys like Mitch Garver and Carson Kelly, Danny Jansen, those are in the top 15. I think you can. I don't know about you guys. Let's start with you, Mario. Can you live and die drafting a Mitch Garver, Carson Kelly, or Danny Jansen at the 13, 14, or 15 spots there?
I think your comment before is the only way I've ever approached catchers and only way I ever will approach catchers. If I know that there's 1 or 2 or 3, and there could be a season where there's like 5 legitimately good ones, but if there's always going to be a finite amount of awesome catchers, and the rest are always going to be bums, always, no matter what. If you can find 2 things, I always approach it this way. I have my studs that if they're there, I'd like them. And honestly, if you're in a 2-catcher league, like your league is a 2-catcher league, and I generally feel a need to get a good catcher there because I don't want 2 bums on my team if I can help it. But
Right.
if I can get a stud, I'm going to get a stud. And years ago, and you remember this because you called me out on it. I took Gary Sanchez and JT Realmuto.
So that was a long time ago.
But they were
time.
bad. They ended up being bad. And like again, it's the same thing like the stolen base. If you're going to live with that approach, you're going to die with that approach if they don't do what you need. So I always try to take what I call bums and honestly put a lot more effort into it than I assume someone else is going to put into it and say, okay, of these 10 guys who I know 5 of them will be available in the last round, who really has a chance to be something special?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I always do that is because I'm sure I'm not the only one, but there's also a inherent to my personality thing. If I draft a guy in the last round, I'm willing to cut him. If I draft a guy in the 10th round, I felt like I paid a price for him that I'm not willing to let go of just yet. So one of the reasons I force myself to wait on catcher is because if I take one of 5 guys in the 20th round, and then within a week he's not doing what I think he should have been doing, I don't mind replacing a 20th round pick. I feel worse if I have to cut, or like even if I have to bench Gary Sanchez. Like I'm not going to cut him right now because I think I took him for a reason. But if I spend a middle-ish round pick on a catcher, I'm more inclined to see it through. So I like what you said about there's a bunch of guys I can get later. Yeah, that's really, to me, focus your attention on, okay, if all of those guys made it to me, who really could become a top 5 catcher? Because I'm telling you right now, there is almost always a top 5 catcher by the end of the season that you could have gotten in one of the latest rounds. Almost always. Because it's a combination of the top guys getting hurt, which they do because they're catchers, and the bad guys just outperforming. They're not, some guys can hit and they don't come to, they don't grow until they've given the opportunity, and then all of a sudden they're legit. So yes, I'm always a top tier, and then nothing else for the last round type of guy.
I look at James McCann, and he's projected to get 452 plate appearances, and he's ranked at number 11. I'm all in, man. I might just steal that guy from all the Mets fans, like I always do in these drafts in these leagues. Is I steal these players from the Mets fans, and then the Mets fans wonder, hey, how come I didn't draft them? But that's what I'm talking about, though. Like that's what I'm, because it's a good valid point you make about, hey, you might want to go after the top 3 catchers or whatever, but. No, I think this year, I think it's a little bit deeper than last year. Last year, I would have been panicking, like, no, go after Salvador Perez and just call it a day. And I got talked out of it by Sean, I think. Maybe that's why I didn't draft him in my points.
Oh, yeah, just blame it on me. Just blame it on me.
Listen,
I'm just
Sean,
saying.
I would have tried to talk him out of it, too. I would have fought that one, too.
But you see, my thing, I don't want to spend too much more time on catcher, but like with Gary Sanchez, it's like you're hoping for Joey Gallo performance, but it's like we turn on blinders to how much he's going to hurt us everywhere else, especially in batting average. It's like we put on these blinders that we don't put on with Joey Gallo. With Joey Gallo, it's like,
you know why?
Why?
I got to jump in, though. It's because you got to start a catcher. That's the problem. Because you have to start somebody. So if you're going to start somebody, my God, give me something, man.
Can I just get Omar Narvaez outside the top 350? He's going like 352nd in NFBC ADP. Yeah. And he's over 3 sample season from 2017 to 2019, 277 hitter, 360 on base. Wasn't great with runs and RBIs, but at least he's giving you batting average. He's not sinking you anymore.
I agree. No, I should say that when I'm pushed against the wall and I can't find a catcher, I want to get the one who's going to hurt my team the least, and that would mean batting average. If a guy gets out there and he doesn't give you any power, it's almost the same as not starting anybody. But if the guy gets out there and he's batting 200, it's actually hurting your team.
Yeah. So and that's my thing with catchers. I'm looking for someone. I'm not looking to get like crazy production there. That's why I've never been huge on Gary Sanchez as a catcher in fantasy. It's just I want someone who's going to hurt my team the least.
It's 100% not the wrong way to look at it. I'm only saying that the reason why you would go with the Gary Sanchez is because you have to plug somebody in there. And on just the hope that he gives you some power, it changes everything. Yeah. It could be 20 free home runs your team didn't have. But it's going to come at a cost.
That's why I don't give up on Gary Sanchez ever. So.
Oh, God.
Neither
God,
do
no.
I.
I'm out. Bye,
Yeah.
Gary Sanchez.
Like Gary Sanchez, if the projections, ATC projections are true, he's going to lead the league in home runs by catchers. That's why you draft Gary Sanchez.
I know. That's it. And
You're chasing
again,
upside.
you have to plug someone in. You got to put someone in that spot.
The Bat X has him second to Salvador Perez at 24, with Salvador Perez at 24.
It's as you can tell, it's
26 batting average.
It's Sean's two favorite catchers of all time, Salvador Perez and Gary Sanchez at the top of that list. So. Let's move on. I just wanted to do some quick hits here. I found out that there's a lot of depth all over the infield, except at second base, which it might be as bad, if not worse, than catcher. I think second base just totally blows.
It's always it's been bad.
But there's some years are better than others. I think I told Sean, like, hey, very early on in the year 2021, season 2 of this podcast, I told Sean, hey, Joey Wendell's available at catcher number 18. That's not a bad pick. And then after a month of like regurgitating all these stats and figures and re-ranking all these guys, catcher number 18 is now Andres Jimenez, which good guy.
Catcher, you mean shortstop?
Second base.
He's listed at second base.
Oh, second base. Okay.
Well, I mean, he qualifies as short and third, but he's my 18th best second baseman.
Andres Jimenez is really climbing up draft boards, and I think it's from people trying to find steals.
Exactly.
Like, he went really early in our TGFBI league, but it's like, I like Andres Jimenez. I think he's going to be a really good player, but I'm not sure if he's going to be a really good fantasy player. He's one of those better in real life than he is in better in fantasy.
Yeah.
And then,
but at the same time, people like the idea that with a good enough glove, you'll get enough at bats. With enough at bats, you'll be able to do something. So that's probably the hope too with him.
And just to tell you, the 12th best second baseman in my list is Gavin Lux, who, Sean, we talked about him last week with Austin. Is he playing? Is he not playing? The Dodgers like to move pieces around. They like to
all he has to do is beat out Chris Taylor. I don't know.
Yeah, but
the Dodgers love Chris Taylor.
I was gonna say that's so much harder to do than you realize. That's like their son. Like, they will not move on from Chris Taylor. So
exactly,
he's got to find another spot. He's not going to play.
It's God. I tried to trade for him in my 30-team dynasty, and me and the guy came really close. We had an agreed upon package, and at the last second, I was just like, "Is he going to even play?" Like, maybe he does after Seager leaves in free agency, which I'm anticipating he will. But it's like for this upcoming season, because I'm trying to win this year, and I'm all in. And it's like, is he going to play? I don't know. If he does play,
I don't think this is his year, to be honest.
Are we even sure that Gavin Lux, I mean, we can look at his numbers in the minors, which were all great, especially when you get to AAA. But I feel like those AAA numbers are so misleading because while he was a good hitter before it, you look at him in the PCL and it was just like 1,100 OPS over like 50 games, something crazy. And are we sure he's that type of hitter? Because you look at his, baseball savant stuff and, the whiff's a little high. Is he actually as good of a hitter as we think? I don't know. I'm a little worried about his floor, which if you looked at his minor league track record, you would think he has a very high floor. But at the major league level, is he just one of those guys that who's somebody that comes to mind? Oh God, there's the minor leaguer in my head that I can't think of who got briefly exposed and like just major league velocity and everything. His swing isn't built for it.
Can you narrow it down a little more, Sean?
It wasn't Kyle Lewis. Kyle Lewis was described as basically what I'm describing Lux to, but it was Kyle Lewis and somebody else. Oh God.
What are we going to say, Mario?
Let me not to go off on a full tangent here, but something that I'm starting to do with Dodgers position players.
Oh boy.
If you look at how quickly they develop as prospects, I've started to think to myself that I'm going to start targeting prospects in the Dodgers organization. They must have something that they must have a good, instructional program for their hitters. But those same hitters have not necessarily translated, like you're saying, to elite Major League Baseball hitters. And I'm almost thinking that the value is in these minor league teams, the Dodgers specifically, minor league affiliates, actually making the player perform better than they could. And then they go back to their average. Like Gavin Lux, what we're seeing right now in Major League Baseball, that might be all he is. He's just an average hitter. But they have such a great developmental program in the minor leagues that these Dodgers prospects are getting almost inflated. So it almost feels like look at Corey Seager. Corey Seager now has been there long enough that now he's hitting again. Yeah. But he had right before he had Tommy John, right? I'm forgetting if it was Tommy John or if it was a knee injury, but he had like
It was Tommy John.
He had Tommy John, and then he had the hip surgery since he was already going to miss the
hip
season.
Also.
Yeah.
But right before he had the Tommy John surgery, I believe his numbers were like creeping back towards average, where you almost have to question, is this the same Corey Seager that like looked like a no doubter?
I mean, he was back-to-back 6'4", like 130 weighted runs created plus. He was insane those first 2 years.
Was that right before he got hurt, though? I thought he tailed off before he got hurt, though.
I cannot remember.
He might have already been hurting. Just because I had Corey Seager on my team, you do notice a dip, but it might have had to do more with the just the aches and pains of
in that 2018, before he went down with Tommy John, he slugged under 400. It's the only time he's done it in his career.
Mm-hmm. So let's say that it, I mean, obviously it's injury based, and that's one thing. But if it's not, my point is maybe he's closer to that 2018 Corey Seager. But my goodness, he had such great development over the minor leagues that he, popped. And maybe that's a Gavin Lux thing too, is that he's actually not as good as his minor league numbers, but the Dodgers minor league system is so good in developing players that he was essentially playing over his head. I'm starting to consider that for a lot of the Dodgers hitters that were, look at their minor leagues. Every single one of their hitters is amazing. It's impossible, but it's amazing. So there might be an inflation to that I'm willing to sell, is my point, with Gavin Lux as well.
And as promised, now we get to the pitching aspect of the things. It's one of the things I am writing in big, bold letters. Hold off on drafting pitchers as long as you can. I'm a sucker for a good pitcher. And like I said, I was high on Brandon Woodruff. And I remember telling Sean, and I might have told you, Mario, as well, that, hey, Mike Clevenger is available in my points league and my keeper points league. I think there's a really good chance I can get him in the first round. And sure enough, I got him in the first round, and he didn't do anything for me because he got hurt.
Yep.
So that's one manifesto. That's part of my manifesto. Hold off, be really disciplined among when doing pitchers. Sean, are you having that same approach this year with starting pitchers?
Starting pitcher is an absolute flustercluck. As I heard for the first time the other day, I thought that was a great take on the word. According to the BAT projections, not the BAT X, there's not anything for pitchers for the BAT X yet. Apparently, Eno and Derek Carty are working on that, so that should be really interesting. But there are all of two pitchers projected to throw 200 innings. One is Garrett Cole right at 200 innings, and the other is Jacob deGrom at 204 innings. And Bieber and Bauer right there at 191, 192, Lance Lynn 190. I feel like the name of the game for fantasy pitching this year is going to be chasing innings. Not necessarily just chasing the strikeouts and the ratios, but if you can chase the innings, then simply by chasing, and this goes for other categories, other years past as well, but especially this year, if you chase the innings, then you're likely to, along the way, get the strikeouts and get the wins. And so simply by chasing one stat, you're giving yourself a better chance at three categories, if that makes any sense. Of course, there are going to be some that kind of break the role with the ratios and the whips and whatnot. But like right now, I'm looking at the BAT projection for Lance Lynn. Projected to go 13-10 with a 3.8 ERA, 190 innings, and a 1.21 whip. That ERA and whip isn't great. But if he gives me 190 innings, that's over 200 strikeouts because he's projected for 210 and 13 wins. I'm really liking Lance Lynn this year, just because he's one of those bona fide veterans who I know is going to go out there, get the ball, and throw a lot. Guys like him, Zach Greinke, Dallas Keuchel, to a degree, Marcus Stroman, even though he sat out all of 2020. I like these guys that I think will go out there and throw a lot of innings.
Mario, how about your take on drafting starting pitchers in 2021?
The best line Sean said there was, if you're going to go after innings, you're going to basically get other categories with it. Because take Lance Lynn, who I generally don't like, and I would avoid on any normal season. If you say that he's going to get 200 strikeouts, which is super possible based on the numbers, there are 10 pitchers maybe that might approach that number. And the guys who won't approach it will not even be close. You're not going to get 20, 30 pitchers in the 170 strikeout range. I don't think. I think you're going to get guys who are only going to throw 100 innings. And I don't care how good you are. If you throw 100 innings, you're not giving me 200 strikeouts. So, yeah, you have to, I think, pay extreme premium for innings this year because you're just not going to get it from anyone. Like last year, every single article I wrote, every single podcast I was on, everyone that asked me, I was buying Zach Gallen at any price. You told me I'd have to spend a second round pick for him, I would have done it. I loved Zach Gallen last year, and I still love him. But are they going to make Zach Gallen jump up to 180 innings this year? I absolutely can't see it.
Yeah, they have him at 160 innings right now, and I think that's aggressive. And I love Zach Gallen as much as you do, but he's somebody that I'm not looking at in drafts because Arizona's playing the long con here.
Exactly. So, what do you? And again, I say this, but during the course of the season, you don't win in the playoffs if you don't make the playoffs, so you got to get there. But you get to September, and they shut down Zach Gallen, your fantasy team loses your ace or your second best pitcher at that point. That's a killer. And if Lance Lynn is still throwing, I would never, ever, ever draft Lance Lynn above Zach Gallen in a normal, everything across the board, even season. But here I am saying that I don't think I could draft Zach Gallen, but Lance Lynn throwing 200 innings is that much more valuable. Wow. So, the overall thing is innings is going to be everything this year. I don't know if you can accurately project who gets it. I think you can semi-accurately project who doesn't get it, and that, unfortunately, is all the young arms I normally would be targeting. It's Zach Gallen. I don't know if Lamet is going to. I don't even know what Lamet's status is at this point.
You are just naming off my entire TGFBI starting rotation.
But they're guys I would want. But what do you do? These are the players who I would normally be all over. And Mitch Keller was a guy I loved last year. And I still love Mitch Keller, but they're not going to give him 180 innings. He's at 100, I'll be happy. So all of a sudden I have to, imagine if your team gets an average of 170 innings from your starters, your fantasy team, and everyone else ends up averaging 120. You have 50 innings on average per pitcher on everybody else in your league. That is a tremendous, just cavernous gap between everyone. Those 50 innings per pitcher get you 30 strikeouts even on a bad pitcher, more than everyone. It's a gigantic gap. So innings will be everything this year, and unfortunately, that means anyone who didn't get to, I don't even know what the higher range was last year. I know 12 starts was basically the most people got. Anyone who didn't approach that, I can't see approaching 180 this year. They're probably off my list, which is so sad to say.
And then the last thing I have on my list here is about relievers. It's just as bad as starting pitching, if not worse. We alluded to earlier in the podcast, but basically, I might just go aggressively chasing after the Aroldis Chapmans, the Liam Hendricks, and the Josh Haders of the world. And it's just really not even of the world. It's just those three guys. They have their own states. And I had Josh Hader as my number one for a long time, but then I look at the landscape again of the relief pitching with all 30 teams. And again, I cannot, for the umpteenth time, I cannot bring myself to remove Aroldis Chapman from the top spot because, number one, he still throws gas. He'll get all the save opportunities, and the Yankees have no plans of making him the high leverage guy anytime soon because, let's face it, Chapman, when you put him in that role, he struggles. But for the ninth inning to close out games and shut things down and get those last three outs, he was born to do that. So even though he's left-handed, no one's going to take him out of that spot. Josh Hader, on the other hand, Sean, we talk about it all the time. Brewers are pretty loaded at the bullpen, and we're only kind of just waiting for Devin Williams to just take that role away from him anytime
when Hader gets closed, or when Hader gets closed, Hader gets traded. There you go.
And then Liam Hendricks is he'd be number one, but he's a little old, but he's on the right team, right place, right time. But those are the top three, and everything else is just a crapshoot. I mean, you might want to make a case for Edwin Diaz to be a part of it, but I'm not. I think he's in the next tier, but the next tier after that, it just thumbs down. So my thing is, you're better off just drafting for upside in terms of not just necessarily getting those saves, but just getting maybe those good ratios like the whips and the ERAs and those high strikeouts from a relief pitcher like a Devin Williams, right? Who's not a closer, but he will put some ungodly numbers. At least that's the hope. And then get the safe floor veterans and who are listed as closer, with the keeping an eye on the other guys on his team who have higher upside with the strikeouts and the faster velocities, and then attacking them on the waiver wire. So if you want to get really aggressive, drafting them very, very late in the draft. Sean, how's your outlook on relievers this year?
Well, usually, especially in points, I'm much better at gauging relievers and points, and I think
Really?
that's just because I'm always pretty good at identifying these relievers that are just good and not worrying about what their role is. Essentially,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously their role is still important, but if they're getting holds, then I don't really care as much about their saves. But I missed the boat so bad in my TGFBI league last night. You saw where I picked Madrigal and Fletcher as my training wheels for Joey Gallo. Well, right after I picked David Fletcher, I knew my next pick was going to be a relief pitcher because my only relief pitcher to that point was James Karinchak, who I got early in round 7.
Yeah.
And this was all the way back in 14. So I'm like, okay, I need to get my second relief pitcher. After I pick Fletcher, Jordan Hicks goes 3 picks later. Amir Garrett 4 picks later. Drew Pomeranz 6 picks later. There's one more. Who am I missing? I went right past him. And oh God, I can't find their name. But yeah, all these players who I were looking at as my second relief pitcher just went right in front of me, and I just sat there. I was like, "Damn you, David Fletcher." But I ended up with Taylor Rogers, and I really do like Taylor Rogers. But as you talked about, that whole left-handed thing, I think is going to be so tough, especially since they went out and got Alex Colomé. Exactly. I don't like Alex Colomé. I think he's really bad. I think he's going to fall off a cliff. He's been overperforming for 4 years in a row. I mean, literally every statistic: batting average, on base, WOBA. You look at his expected WOBA and expected ERA, and they're way higher. And I think Taylor Rogers is still the best relief pitcher in that bullpen. But how many chances does he get? I mean, Trevor May's out of the equation. Maybe Alex Colomé gets plugged in and just fills in the Trevor May role. I don't know. You would think they're bringing him in to close, but it's tough. And then, of course, right after I picked Taylor Rogers, J.D. Davis, who's going to be my starting third baseman on the short term, gets picked. And my starting third baseman is Heimer Candelario, and I still don't have a first baseman or a quarter infielder. And looking.
You have a first baseman in Heimer Candelario.
I had to move him. I had to move him to third base, and I still don't have a first baseman or a quarter infielder.
Before I go to Mario, I just want to point out. Okay, so I can't read, but let me read my note here. The strategy that I'm gonna probably utilize is I might want to draft the upside setup and middle relievers over the safe floor veterans listed as closers. So getting those 7th, 8th inning guys might pay off dividends later on in the season. Number 2 about Taylor Rogers, just to show you how the mighty have fallen here. Rogers was in January and maybe early February before the Alex Colomé signing by the Twins, was constantly listed at 6, 7, no worse than the 8th best relief pitcher coming into this season. And in my mock drafts, I was like aggressively getting Taylor Rogers because I was under the impression that the Twins were not going to utilize him as a high leverage guy, but be comfortable with him being the closer. After Alex Colomé, he's now listed as the 15th best relief pitcher. And he's even behind a guy like Devin Williams, who we just talked about. Like, wait, Devin Williams is he closing? No.
Yeah, I mean, Taylor Rogers still had 9 saves in 2020. And that was a high amount for most relief pitchers last year. I think who led the league? It was Brad Hand led with like 12 or 16. Oh God. And it wasn't that high of an amount. So I mean, at this point, like I draft Taylor Rogers. I'm hoping for a 30 save season like in 2019. I know I'm probably not getting that because of Alex Colomé. But relief pitching is just hell in Roto. I hate relief pitching Roto hell.
So Mario, you had mentioned a little bit of relief pitching. What do you call it? Strategy on your end. Anything else you wanted to add from your statements from earlier this podcast?
No, it's not great. I'm kind of torn in both camps. If I think during a draft that everyone is just, I can't find this to be likely, but if everyone is just totally bailing on the people who are actually listed as closers, because like you mentioned Alex Colomé, we know he's not good. Every fantasy baseball manager in the world knows he's not good.
We're gonna pick him because he's gonna get saves,
but he's not good.
I mean, but like these teams just have this obsession with, well, if he closed before,
the Shane Green
he
effect.
must be able to close again. It's amazing.
Right.
So like, you put Alex Colomé on a team and you say, would he be a relief pitcher on your fantasy roster? The answer is 100% no. But then you say, well, wait, he's closing games, and you're like, well, I got to draft him. I have, somebody's got to get those saves. So I'm basically going to see how each draft goes. Where I mean, you mentioned James Karinchak. Like he's kind of a home run guy because he's so good. Devin Williams, kind of a home run guy because he's so good. Other than those guys, I'm going to basically see if in a given draft are people totally just ignoring the guys listed as closers. If so, I'll take them and hope that the saves numbers are actually right. And if they start going, then I'm going to take just the best reliever on a team. There's nothing else you can do at this point. Get talent, which I don't normally do because saves are so like
precious.
One player can get a save in any one given game. That's it. I think I'm going to kind of roll the dice a little more this year and say I'm not going to pay for it. Even Josh Hader, even Aroldis Chapman, like there's no saying that those guys, they don't move Hader out of the role. Like we said, they're probably not going to move Chapman out of the role, but like, what if he starts getting hit harder and they think to themselves like, well, we have so many arms, let's rotate through.
Yeah.
Like, man, it's I don't want to pay for saves. I'm probably going to do it, but I don't want to. That's going to be my stance.
Interesting, because Mario's always about why get the guy that you feel like you have to when you don't have to, and now you're
100%. You're so right.
Now you're saying the opposite, kind of. Yeah.
Yep. It bothers me because it's. I should phrase it this way. I'm going to try to see where the discount is, and hopefully the discount is the guy you're supposed to get. The closer.
And you mentioned something like, I'm going to go after talent as opposed to the save opportunities, which is, hey, Sean, I don't know if people notice, but that's kind of something that we kind of bring to the table, right? As a podcast, we try to bring in that real baseball with the fantasy baseball, and we kind of mesh them together, and we have this crossover going. But that's all we've been doing is just like, we don't necessarily look at the and the traditional fantasy aspect of things, but we kind of see if real life talent evaluation can be useful in a fantasy baseball realm. And I think this year, I think for a guy like me and Sean, we were made for this, right? Where we have a list of relief pitchers in our heads. Like, now's the chance to get them because everything's so murky. You might as well go after the most talented relievers out there as opposed to the people you think are going to get the save opportunities like in years past. So listen, man, it's like I've been saying to Sean this whole season number 2 here of the podcast. Brand new decade, brand new baseball. It's a brand new it's a brand new outlook on fantasy baseball, brand new outlook on the game itself. Either you adjust or you sink. So that's basically the mantra here. And that's all I had. I was going to do some lightning round predictions, but Sean, as they're telling me here is we're running out of time. How are we doing on time? Are we,
we are at about 1:15.
I really want to.
This is your mistake for bringing me on. I can't help myself. This is a big mistake, guys.
Well, I mean, we have so much to catch up on. That's why, all the time.
Sure.
All right, Sean, if you want, we can either do it now or we could save it for next week.
Up to you, boss.
Sean, Mario, let's just start with you, Mario. Do you have any lightning round predictions you can make for division winners, World Series winners, award winners, anything of that sort?
I will only say this. I was really impressed by Tampa Bay in a short season. They are such a perfect team to chunk together wins over 162 games that I thought they were the team that was going to suffer the most in a short year because they were going to be, their numbers team. So they're going to slowly gain the edge over a long season, but knocking it down to 60 games, I thought they'd be more average. I am really impressed that they won 40 games like that. And I don't know how you can, I'm a Yankees fan, but that doesn't matter in this conversation. I don't know how you can look at the Rays and say that they're not, they might dominate 162 games at this point. I don't even care what their team looks like.
A full year of Arozarena seems really, really fun.
They seem to have figured out how to win games. I don't know.
It's funny you mentioned that because last year around this time, I told Sean, Sean, look at this Rays team. I mean, it sucks for fantasy baseball, but they look like they're built for a 162 game season because
they totally were.
They have platoon players at every position where they're put in a position to succeed the most. And then when the 60 game schedule came out, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I like them this much. And oops,
exactly.
wrong.
Exactly. They're in the World Series.
They're built for 60 games, 40 games, 162 games, whatever. This year, however, I don't know, man. I feel like they lost too many guys. But you know what? If anything, let's just do some quick World Series predictions. Last month, I had the White Sox and the Mets. I'm sorry, not last month, January, after they signed Liam Hendricks, I was excited about the White Sox and Mets facing off in the World Series in 2021. And remember, Sean, I was telling you we should do a monthly prediction adjustment, and we missed it in February. So let's at least do that. But it's March, and I don't feel so good about my White Sox. So right now, I have the Dodgers beating the Yankees in 5 when it's all said and done in 2021. Mario, give me your World Series predictions.
If you're putting me on the spot, I'm going to say Rays over Padres. I think the Dodgers are amazing. And here's the problem with the Padres. They're going to be such a hot pick because of what they've done. I don't like that. I don't like how hot they are. I like the fact that they were the team who signed Manny Machado for a 10-year deal. Mm-hmm. And when they did that, they basically said, we're not going to win this year, but we're going to be there. We're going to be there for the next 7 years. I love that because they honestly followed up Manny Machado by not really going crazy until last season.
Yeah.
So they're there. It's not whatever they've done in the last 3 months actually means nothing to me. It's what they did in the prior 2-3 years that have gotten them to this point. The Dodgers winning the World Series, I think, very much helps the Padres slip in there. Not that the Dodgers are going to fall asleep or anything, but you have a somewhat natural letdown. Look at the Nationals of last year. So you now open the door for the Dodgers. Worst case scenario, San Diego is a wild card team who can still make noise. But I just said about the Rays, like, how do you not look at them as, I won't say they're World Series favorites, but I don't see how they're not one of the best teams by the end. So that's,
And what's so funny with the Rays is they're always projected to do so just bleh. Yeah. And they always overperform it by a mile every year.
It means every single year. It's amazing.
And I'll go more in depth next week. So we're running out of time. But I was going to say, in my danger of picking the Dodgers, I'm basically saying there's going to be a back-to-back winner for the first time in over 2 decades. So, say what you will about baseball having this discrepancy in competition, but you can't argue too much with the results, as there is a little bit of parity at the end of the season, as there's been a different team winning the World Series. But I'm going safe here, Dodgers and Yankees, like it's 1981. Make 2021 1981 all over again. Sean, World Series prediction right now. Let's go.
I'm going to take Padres over Astros.
Yes.
Yeah.
You guys are great.
I think the Astros are being slept on. I think they lose Springer. Verlander's out for the year. I think a lot of people are counting them out. But I think what people aren't counting on is what they're getting back. Yordan Alvarez could easily be the best hitter in all of baseball. I think he has the skills to put up numbers in the same stratosphere as Mike Trout and Juan Soto. I think he's that good. Obviously, you're probably not going to get anything from him fielding. As long as he's just their DH, he just needs to stay on the field and produce. I think Kyle Tucker is really in for a breakout season. And I mean, the helium on Kyle Tucker is about as high as it's ever been, I think, in the fantasy world. Yeah. He's going anywhere in like mid-second to early third. I'm having to struggle over if I want to keep him over Shohei Ohtani in our Baseball Life League. Bregman's back. Correa's back. Altuve's back. Correa's in a walk year. That's another thing, players always go crazy bonkers in their walk year. In their pitching staff. It's a bunch of names that you probably don't know, but they've recently just signed Jake Odorizzi. Was that last night, this morning, something like that? I think he's a guy that's going to do really well in Houston. I mean, Houston's taken at least 7 former Minnesota pitchers, Ryan Presley being one, and just converted them into dominance. I think Odorizzi's the same camp. Full year from McCullers. McCullers needs to stay healthy. Urquidy and Javier are both awesome. The news that Framber Valdez might miss the entire year over a broken pinky. I saw the play. He ended up pitching the rest of the inning. I don't know what happened, but they said he broke one of his pinky or ring finger on the throwing hand and he's going to miss the whole year. That to me seems insane.
That's catastrophic, honestly.
Yeah. That's huge for them. And then Forrest Whitley just got diagnosed with the UCL sprain. So now I'm starting to talk myself out of it. They're starting pitching depth, but I really like Urquidy.
You made enough good points, honestly.
Yeah, I really like Urquidy, and I really like Javier. And that's 5 right there when you add in Odorizzi. I have a weird relationship with Brandon Bielak where I really think he's going to be good, but I don't think he has the fastball velo, the stuff to really stick. And then the bullpen, they had, I heard on their broadcast, their spring training radio broadcast a couple days ago, they debuted 15 pitchers last year, and 12 of them were relief pitchers. I'm like, what in the world? How did they come up with these people? And they all did, none of them sucked, were like terrible.
Well, you know how they do it, Sean.
Pine tar.
No, well, not just that. They all cheat.
Yeah, like Brooks Raley was a guy they got from off the scrap heap from Cincinnati, and they turned him into this hard hit avoiding savant essentially. And they picked up Ryan Stanek. There's a lot of names that are interesting over there.
Yeah,
so, I think the Astros are being slept on.
That's why I don't give up on the Astros as much as other people want to give up on them. I mean, and then you look at the competition. I mean, the A's. I don't know where people are getting the A's to compete this year. I don't see it.
Mike Fiers for Cy Young.
Yeah, and then Chris Bassett's your number one. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a hard pass for me. I am not a believer of Chris Bassett anchoring a playoff contending.
I don't think the A's are this year, but they could be next year, the year after that, once Luzardo and Puck build up some innings.
Are you sure? Because after that, they're gonna just sell off all their best players and
yeah. By that time, Matt Chapman's going to be traded. Matt Olson's going to be traded.
It's rinse, repeat, and all that. The lather, repeat.
Can they trade Matt Olson to the Rockies already? I really am in the mood for a 600-foot home run right now.
There you go. Even with the new balls, huh? And that's the show. That we ran a little over as always, but that's fine. We covered a lot of stuff. Mario, please tell the people where they can see your work and their stuff that you do over there.
It's going to be on Sportfolio, which is the normal website I always run. And I'm going to be on Fantasy Pros again this year, which was really, really a nice experience. Started last March, and then the pandemic hit, which was so disappointing to put a lot of my articles like on hold.
I was going to ask you about that. How did that go?
Yeah, no, but it's been okay because we then went through a lot of mock drafts, and obviously, I love drafting. So a lot of my content was basically going through draft strategy, which I love. So it was like an extended draft season for me. So yeah, the Fantasy Pros will have a lot of my articles throughout the year. And of course on Twitter at Mario Mergola.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mario. Well, for you, it's an hour later, so you're probably
this afternoon.
Got it this afternoon.
But thank you guys. It is always a pleasure. Really, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and if you want, you can come back to recap our drafts as well. That seems to be a tradition around the Total Basis podcast, is bringing Mario to recap our draft and see where we went wrong and went right. Sean, thank you so much for you did a podcast this morning. You want to brag about that a little bit?
It got moved to tomorrow.
Well, you want to brag about that anyway?
Yeah, that's the one I'm going to be on with at MLB Moving Averages, good old John Boy over there. And Tony Tambo, and there's a third person that's going to be joining us, but we're just going to start kind of breaking down. We're all in the same TGFBI league now, which is kind of weird because the thing's still going, so I don't want to give away too much, but we kind of want to break down like how we got to this point in our drafts. So it's going to be really fun. MLB Moving Averages is awesome to listen to. He's like one of the most enthusiastic guys. I listened to one of his shows. He carried the entire show by himself for like an hour, and he didn't lose an ounce of enthusiasm. He's like Brooklyn all the way. He's going to be really fun. I'm going to share the podcast once he puts it up in Baseball Life so everyone else can listen to it. But it's going to be really fun. I've been Tony Tambo's alarm clock since he works nights. And he's like, hey, if I'm on the clock early in the morning, just text me or call me. He said, here's my number. I just need you to call me because I'll probably be asleep at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. But it's been really fun. Like I said, it's a tough draft. There's so many smart people in here. It's a really tough draft.
Well, I mean, you wanted that challenge, right? So
yeah,
here you go.
Awesome.
I mean, that's the reason I bring Mario into our dress, because I want that challenge. So
I appreciate that.
Bring in a ringer of sorts. But yeah, I am Felipe. That is Sean over there. Mario, as guest, thank you for coming on. We are on every Sunday morning here on the Baseball Life Facebook group. So please join us and then follow our Life Group podcast. When you follow us, you follow all our other podcasts. Dong City, the Audible, which is a football one, the Step Back, which is the basketball one, the Workshoot, which is the wrestling life, and then every Sunday morning we start your Life Group podcast week with the Total Basis podcast Sunday mornings, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. Felipe, Sean, thank you. Mario, thank you. We'll see you next week.